I would now like to go and introduce our speaker, which is Aizan Echeverry Escudero. She's a lawyer who has studied at the University of San Francisco, and in 2019, she has become the executive director of CONICYT in Chile, which she has helped from that moment on change toward the National Research and Development Agency in it, where she's now a national director. And she will give a short insight into the Latin American perspective on the roadmap. Aizan, can I please ask you to go ahead and give your views?
Thank you so much, Charles, and good afternoon to everyone that has joined this breakout session. I have the honor to talk about the work that was done by the Steering Committee Group on Social Cohesion and Community Resilience. For those of you who saw Stephen's presentation a couple of minutes ago, this is one of the 5 pillars that were discussed and drafted for the UN Recovery Map. And I was lucky to be co-chair of this 5 pillar on social cohesion and community resilience. I want to just make a brief intervention just to explain how the work of the steering committee was and what were the main discussions that we had around how to promote science for pandemic recovery. And then I will make a very brief reference to what is going on in Chile. And I believe when I speak about Chile is something that can relate also to the rest of Latin America. So starting with the steering committee, we had a group with representatives from all 5 different continents. We have representatives from funding agencies related to science. And the task looked almost impossible to achieve in such a short timing and short notice. And also because one of the main subject we were supposed to discuss was social cohesion and community resilience, which is something that at the beginning seemed to be very specific to a particular region, territory, or culture. So the first meeting we had revolved around how we could generate a discussion that had a global impact, but also that could represent and acknowledge the differences in cultures, territories, and the difference of the challenges that were faced by the different members of the group. With that in mind, we started explaining how social cohesion, community resilience was being affected, or the changes that we were seeing in our different communities. And very soon in the discussion, we realized that because this is a general and global pandemic, the impact this was having in our different societies and also in the way our research communities were reacting to this was not that different. And that was probably the main and the most important discovery of our discussion, that even though we came from different backgrounds and from different parts of the world, the challenges and the worries we had were quite similar. So as a result of those discussions, the steering group recommended basically to promote and fostering the development of science in 3 main areas related to social cohesion and community resilience. The first one, and probably the most important one, has to do with inequalities. One of the acknowledgements that we had among the group was how the existing inequalities in our different communities were deepened and strengthened because of the pandemic. How we had seen that racism and sexism and homophobia, but also the differences between rural areas and people living in the city had just deepened because of the pandemic. And then one of the realizations behind that was that this was not necessarily a consequence of the pandemic, but it was a consequence of the pre-existing inequalities in our different systems. Basically, the way our societies were structured and how the differences in access to health benefits or social security and other structures in the different societies, those differences were even more important after the pandemic. So our recommendation around that was to promote research on how knowledge and science can inform the way these different institutions that interact in the social framework can improve and be rebuilt for a better society where inequalities are not as strong as we have seen them in the past year. The second main area for research that we identified was communication and trust building. One of the we all recognized was how the impact science and the scientific community was having in the different governments, and also how civil society was contributing to the decision making of the different governments differed largely among the different countries. We had large discussions on how the participation of science was different in New Zealand in comparison to the United States, in Chile compared to what was happening in Canada, and so on. So understanding how this contribution that science and civil society was doing to the decision-making process because of the pandemic, that was excellently done in some cases and not so well in others, was something that the research communities and the funding agencies should look at how we could motivate more research around that. And that connected directly to the impact of social media and communication and media in general with regards to the pandemic that happened before the events of last year, of this year in the United States. But basically, the discussion was around exactly that, how we could generate knowledge on the use of social media and communications in general to promote social cohesion and community resilience rather than to strengthen the divisions that we are seeing in the societies nowadays. And then finally, our third area for research had to do with digital technologies as a whole. We all have seen how digital technologies have facilitate and allowed for social interaction during the pandemic and during the different curfews and lockdowns we are living all around the world. But also we have seen how digital technologies have also enabled harassment and surveillance and still generate mistrust among society. And so how we could promote the generation of knowledge around a better use of digital technologies was something that the steering group also recommended. The work was intense, and it was a very interesting discussion. It's also a discussion that I think reflects what is going on in the different countries. I can talk about Chile and Latin America, but one of the things we've seen, and I think it's a reflection of that discussion also, is how our researchers have moved into interdisciplinary research more strongly during this year. How, even though at the beginning all focus was put on research around healthcare and health systems and biology, we are moving towards lines of research that are related to the way our cities are built, the way our communities are organizing because of the pandemic, the way our media is reacting, and also the way our culture is also changing because of the pandemic. So as a conclusion, basically, and before we go to the questions, I believe the work that was done by the steering committee is a very interesting synthesis of what we all are seeing in our different countries and the way the community is also shifting. The main challenge, I believe, is how we can continue this momentum and how we can from the different agencies that fund the research promote and enhance the impact that this science is having in the rebuild of our economies, our societies, our health after the pandemic. So those are my very brief remarks, Charles. They told me 5 to 10 minutes. I think I was a little bit over that. I apologize, but I'm very happy to take questions from the audience and open the discussion.
Thank you very much, Eisen. That's very useful and very interesting. So we rather have you talk for longer than for shorter. I will allow now people to ask questions. I think the best is for anyone who has a question to indicate and to press the blue button that they can be to ask questions if you're the point. Maybe I could start off asking a question. In your role as role for the government in cooperation with research to how they can best use this roadmap.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Charles, for the question. This is a discussion that it's an ongoing discussion that we have had not only through the creation of this roadmap, but it's also the discussion that has been going on for quite some time now at the Global Research Council as well. We have this tension in between curiosity-driven science and science that is focused in particular needs of the society. And I believe what our agency has come to a conclusion, and it's also the conclusions that many other agencies are getting to in the context of the Global Research Council as well, is that we need to have a combination of both. And when we have curiosity-driven science, we generate the capacities in our scientific community to quickly react to what the needs of the everyday life or the crisis that we have ahead of us, like the pandemic, impose. So when we have the combination of two, and we have a roadmap that like the one we are discussing today, it's fairly easy for agencies like the one I lead to take the roadmap, identify where the capacities are, and generate incentives that are focused in what the needs of research are, that are very fast to put in place. We had the experience last year with COVID. Like many other countries, we opened a call for proposals on research related to the pandemic and its consequences. And what we saw is that our community basically took their lines of research and sort of calibrate them to respond to what the needs of the country were. So that exercise is something that we can now do with the help of this roadmap, and to do it in a way that it can also be complemented by the efforts of other countries. So if we keep this collaboration and we all act in a similar manner, not only we will have impact in our countries, but in our regions and in the country as a whole also.
Thank you, Eisen. Sorry, I missed a part of your answer, so I'm not sure if you've already touched upon on the regional cooperation and how you see that, or maybe you've just discussed that.
I touched on it very briefly. Let me just explain a little bit more. One of the challenges that is extremely obvious after the pandemic is how we can generate solutions that are not only local but are of a global impact, and how we can generate knowledge that can go across our frontiers and knowledge that can also benefit from the knowledge of others. When we have instruments such as this roadmap that are created through a discussion with participation from people from all over the world, and you realize, like we did in our steering group, that the questions we have and the challenges we face are not that different. And when you come together and you agree that generating incentives to the creation of knowledge in these areas, and others are doing it with you, that idea of having knowledge that goes across the frontiers and that can collaborate with others become much more doable and much more real. So I see this as an opportunity to take the collaboration that many of us already have and that has been built over the years, but to make it deeper and to make it stronger and to make it with a common objective, which is the recovery after the pandemic and the rebuild of our economies, our societies, our relationships, not as they were, like Stephen said in his presentation, but as we wish they were, following what the SDG mandate is also. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. And do you see that the willingness of government to work with you on this as they do now because of the need of science for the COVID and the way to deal with it? Do you see their willingness to also extend to the longer term, also looking at the recovery?
I see it. I am not that enthusiastic on that. I think that's a discussion that it's today open. That changing the space science has is something that it's not done overnight. And today we are in the midst of the pandemic, and the need is there. So it's very easy. It's an imperative for governments and decision makers to have science and scientists by their side. But we also know how culture is and how cultural change is, and it takes time. So once the pandemic is gone and this need that we see today is also gone, I think we, the funding agencies, and we, the scientific community as a whole, need to make sure that there is a cultural change and that it's not something we have, or we cannot take it for granted. It takes action, it takes commitment, and it takes to maintain this relationship over time. And that is something that is not only the work of the government, but it's also, and I would say mainly, a responsibility of the scientific community and the funding agencies as well.
Yes, thank you. To build on the position that you have now and to really work to make sure to maintain that for the future. Thank you very much. Can I now please allow Laura Rovelli to come in and ask her question? I hope she will be joining us. Yes, Laura. If you can hear us, please ask your question.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear.
Laura, we have difficulty hearing you. Please, could I allow just, because I see that you also posted your question in the comments. I can read that question. And the question is for you, Eisen. What kind of challenges do you consider that should be made in research assessment to promote science for recovery?
Well, thank you for the question, Laura. This is a subject that not only that I love, but in one we have been working as an agency for over a year already. Research assessment models have been evolving over the years, and when we see what is happening in the world with the DORA declaration and so on, many agencies like ours have been questioning whether the current models we have that are based on paper publication and citation is the correct model for science as a whole. So in that discussion, which is a very difficult one, of course, has also been impacted by the pandemic. And when we see today the need for the generation of public goods, when we see today the relationship the different scientific reviews are having with different governments and universities around the globe, and the way we have a need for accessing knowledge in a way that it's faster and it's more collaborative than it was before, it makes us question these models and also try to find the right balance between science that comes with a purpose, the purposes of benefiting society as a whole, and science that it's also excellent at the same time. So those are very abstract concepts that the scientific community as a whole is looking into as of today. And it's part of the discussion we're having. Now, if I had to give an opinion on a discussion that is still going on in our country, of course, that goes directly to your question, I think one of the points that it's not controversial at all, it's how we can make sure that through our research assessment, we also ensure the diversity of our science. When we look at the numbers and we see how there's also the same inequities we see in the world as a whole, the same inequities that have been deepened because of the pandemic, and we look into our scientific community, those inequities are there also. Gender inequities, territory inequities, the North and the South, and so on. So if we had to commit to at least one change in our research assessment, and this in the context of a much broader discussion, I would say that ensuring that those research assessments are aware and acknowledge diversity as part of the excellence of the research we made, I would say that would be my bet and the main change that I think it's necessary today.
Thank you very much, Laura. Sorry, I've muted you, so if you can unmute yourself, and then maybe you can indicate if you want further answering. Are you able to do that? At the same time, I want to invite anyone who has a question to please indicate that by pressing the blue button to have audio and video present. I see there's another, I don't know if it's a question, but at least a comment by Carlos.
Mm-hmm. I see the comment, Charles, and it's an excellent point. Today, when we look at the scientific products, right, or the outcome we want from the projects that are funded, traditional science look or sees as possible products papers that are published, and that's the way science has been working for so many years. But when you moved to different disciplines or even transdisciplinary research, you start seeing different things. We have books that are published. We have other sorts of knowledge that it's captured in different objects than papers that are published. And one of the challenges we face as funding agencies is to include those products in the outcomes we expect from research. But also there's applied research, and applied research is something that has been not only fashionable, but very needed because of the pandemic. We need questions to problems that are happening today. And that applied science has different outcomes that are not just papers that are published, that cannot happen in a vacuum. They happen and they exist because we have this other science that already exists, because we have a scientific community that is robust and mature and can take from this and take that knowledge and transform it into applied science. So I believe one of the main challenges we have today is how we can take all these differences and all these needs that are existing in our community and reflect those in the different instruments we have for the promotion of science and knowledge creation. And that, just like we said before, it's also a cultural change. We need to change the way our governments and decision makers take knowledge and use it in their processes. We also need to change the way our more traditional scientific community sees the outcome of research and understand that variety, not only in the research we do and the research assessment, but also in the outcome of that knowledge is needed for us to basically have a better science, and a science that can actually promote and contribute to a better world.
Thank you, Eisen. And if you now look, and I still keep inviting people who want to ask questions, but maybe I can ask you one more question. If we now really look at the Latin American perspective, where do you think Latin America is different and requires a different approach compared to other regions in the world?
Oh, that's a tough one. Latin America, we have so many specifics, right? And we have this culture of looking and also, not just looking, but also admiring the science that it's done in the North. And when we look and we see the research that it's done in South America, the maturity of our research community, but also, and I would say most importantly, the collaboration that exists today among Latin American researchers, there's an opportunity that I believe we have not profited enough from. Even when I look at my agency, we have a long-standing collaboration with Peru, with Brazil, with Colombia, with Argentina. But there's so much to build on top of that. I believe what happened with COVID and the different activities that were organized by different fora, this, for example, Global Research Council as well, where we had the opportunity of sharing experiences among the different agencies, we very quickly realized that what we were doing was not that different. And today, because of those discussions and because of that collaboration, there's a space for enhancing the collaboration, not only at the level of our agencies, but also at the level of our scientists, which is something that it's happening, but it's happening without a guidance and without making sure or making efforts for that collaboration to have a broader impact. So, like any other region in the world, we have aspects that make us very similar. We share, in a large part, a culture that it's not that different. And we have scientific communities that are mature enough to strengthen their collaboration. So the challenges I see is not only looking into Europe and the US and Asia to improve and better in our science, but also and as a priority to look what is happening in our region, and from here build better and stronger collaboration.
Thank you very much, Eisen. I see one more question coming in from Soledad Gutierrez from Uruguay. And it's a question that I like, so I'm going to pose it to you. Do you think it's possible to do a collective effort to do that in the frame of ISC, and maybe through dissemination of materials as one of the examples? What is your view on that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Soledad. We're good friends with Uruguay. We admire the work they do always. So it's an excellent question. Two things. First, we are at a moment, it's been called the Year of Science, where we are not only bearers of good news, but we are also needed by governments and society as a whole, more than any other period, at least in my life for sure. So that momentum needs to be maintained over time, and that requires effort, and that requires dissemination materials, conferences like this one. It also requires a strategy, and a strategy that it's not easy to do. Secondly, we need to involve more people. One of the problems we all face, at least in Latin America, is the few resources that science has, right? There's always not enough resources. And even though many of our countries have improved and increased the investment in research and development, it's still very far behind from developing countries and other parts of the world. But also when we look at that investment and we see the participation of civil society, industry, and others rather than just government in that investment, we see that the numbers are even lower. So how we generate a better collaboration within our countries where we have other stakeholders such as the industry and the civil society also contributing in the financing of research and development is something that we need to tackle, and we need to tackle urgently. It's easier said than done, especially if you want to make sure that science remains independent, and you want to make sure that excellence is what determines the availability of funds. It's hard to do, but it's something that we need to look into detail, and it's something that we really need to study as a region as soon as possible. We have the IDB that is looking into these issues as well. It's a problem that that they have acknowledged for many years, and from Chile we are promoting a discussion around financing that goes beyond government financing that we hope we can develop during 2021, and where I will make sure that Uruguay gets all the invitations and they can participate as well and give us ideas on how to do it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's a very interesting subject, and I think it's in a way daunting to look at the financing within Latin America for science. But indeed, we might want to, in a way, use the grown attention for science at this point to really emphasize the importance of it, and also to commit for more funding. One more last question I see in the chat is on the existence of international organizations within Latin America that promote the advancement of science. Is that something you would like to comment on?
For sure, absolutely, and thank you, Jesus, for the question. There are organizations. There are also groups within larger organizations. I believe one of the and this is a personal opinion, but one of the challenges I face is to keep up with all the organizations that already exist. I believe that rather than starting discussion among different fora, if we achieve common grounds and we achieve a common agenda among all the different initiatives that are happening today, then our chances to generate an impact and to actually generate that change that is needed is something that is going to happen faster. As of today, we as the Research and Development Agency for Chile, we participate in most of them. It takes time, it takes effort, but it's also an investment for the future. So rather than creating new organizations, I would say, or at least my recommendation to my team, and if others want to take it, is to take better advantage of the one that already exist, but also work into coming into common agendas rather than many subjects that happen in parallel. Mm-hmm.